I don't know when I first experienced my mother as a photographer, or whether I thought all mothers were photographers, or whether I thought the photographer was my mother. I remember being only about 15 months old and being used as a model. That's the first time I remember being used as a photographic model by my mother. And the story which she had set up was a child sees herself in a mirror for the first time. And in my mother's dressing room in Chelsea, there was a big cheval mirror, a swing mirror, showed yourself full length, and you could adjust the level so you could look at one part of your outfit more than any other and swing it around. And I had to go back and come up to the mirror, just walking, and all dressed like for a party with a big sash and a white frock and white shoes, and come to the mirror and kind of go, oh, and smile. And I did that a few times. I got the idea, but I didn't like the going back and repeating it and doing it again and again. And I guess it must have been much later on, when I must have been at least 6 or 8 years old, I realized, well, this was nonsense. It was never the first time I was seeing myself in the mirror. I'd probably seen myself in that mirror lots of times, because I always walked from the night nursery through the dressing room to my mum's bedroom when I came out in the morning. And in any case, because I repeated it so many times, it was not strictly the first time a child sees herself in the mirror. So I think that picture post story, whatever age it was, I actually analyzed what was going on. I realized fairly quickly that the camera always lies.
Also ich erinnere mich schon, als ich klein war, die Bilder mit dem Esel zum Beispiel, dass sie sehr viel im Garten rumgerannt ist, und dieser Esel, der war auch sehr domestiziert und kam auch ins Wohnzimmer, hat er sich noch reingequetscht neben den Flügel. Dann war das Wohnzimmer voll. Daran kann ich mich auch erinnern, dass der ins Haus reinkam und dass sie also überall Esel und mich und Lindl und diese Familienszenen im Garten da fotografiert hat. Und mich als Kleinkind, das hat mich nicht gestört, weil wir haben früher darüber gesprochen, ich nicht in Pose geworfen wurde, sondern das war einfach so, wie es kam. Meine Mutter hat es ihrer Mutter sehr übel genommen, dass sie als Kind in dieser Generation man wunderhübsch wie eine Puppe ausgestattet werden musste, um fotografiert zu werden. Und das wollte sie uns auf keinen Fall zumuten. Also wir durften uns normal bewegen. Und diese Kleinkindzeit, da kann ich mich gut dran erinnern.
No, my understanding from my mother was that she was dedicated to a concert career. She had studied music first with the mother of the art historian Ernst Gombrich, who was herself a musician of a Czech background again, so that the sort of Jewish community was still very Austro-Hungarian, you know, that people crossed borders, and it was a very fluid community. And then she went to the Conservatorium, and she started giving concerts in Europe. And my understanding from Mummy was that she was due to start a concert tour in the United States, but she developed very bad arthritis in her right arm. And at one time she said it might have been psychosomatic, but there definitely was an arthritis there, which can come from overuse or misuse, you know, of the bones, or maybe it was inherited, that weakness, but she couldn't go on performing. She always carried on playing the piano. Every evening she practiced, and my sister and I both had to learn instruments from a very young age. I started with the piano by the time I was 5. Funnily enough, this time with Ernst Gombrich's wife, who taught me. So his mother taught my mother, his wife taught me. And we would sing around the piano in the evenings. We would sing Lieder, and Mummy would accompany us. But she obviously decided she didn't want the life of leisure that her mother had had. Mummy didn't really judge or criticize other people very often, but she did say that her mother was a dilettante. And I think she very much didn't want to be that. She wanted to dedicate herself to some art form. And at that time, of course, photography was what we would call now very hot. It was a very live medium. It was a new medium in the 20s and early 30s. And so Mummy went to the Grafische Lehrschule. She enrolled herself. And she started a photography course there. And she absolutely fell in love with it as a medium. And she had already started taking photographs. We have photo albums from holiday tours she took with her parents, mainly around the classical ruins of the Mediterranean, Egypt, the Middle East, Greece, Italy, and some of Mummy's earliest pictures were in fact taken in the Italian islands, particularly Sicily. And she already had an eye both for portraiture and composition, I would say. And I remember the photograph of the monks sweeping the floors in their monastery in Assisi in Italy, taken at the beginning of the 1930s, 30 or 31. And she said to me when we looked at the picture together, she said, "It looks to me as if they're dancing a ballet." And it's true, they're a bit like the corps de ballet. I mean, it's completely spontaneous, it's not organized, but they have these big brooms, as though they were in Cinderella perhaps, sweeping up. And the movements in this, they have either bare feet or these big sandals, you can see their feet moving across the stage, as it were, where they're sweeping this large cloister. And she had an eye for this kind of movement, even though it was a time when it was hard for the camera to freeze the movement because of the very, very slow film speeds. But she was definitely capturing something. But she was also quite convinced she would not be taken seriously as a photographer in Vienna. And she said that was as a woman, but I suspect, given what was happening in the 1930s and from 1926, 28 onwards, in fact, also as a Jew. And she studied with Trude Fleischmann, who was a very well-known portraitist with her own studio in Vienna. And Trude went to the United States just as Mummy really began to think of getting out of Austria ahead of the war. For other reasons, she was delayed, mainly because of her mother, but she did start exploring other places to go to, particularly in visiting England.
Also ich habe das so verstanden, dass sie eigentlich Pianistin werden wollte. Das ist zu kurz gesprungen, weil eigentlich hätte sie lieber die Schule zu Ende gemacht, aber ihre Musiklehrerin war überzeugt, dass sie ganz besondere Begabung war und hat ihre Mutter überredet, sie mit 16 die Schule verlassen zu dürfen, um Musik zu studieren. Dann war sie an der Musikakademie und das war für sie eine wunderschöne Zeit, sagt sie. Sie ist jeden Abend irgendwo ins Konzert gegangen, im Musikverein, das war um die Ecke, die wohnten hinter der Karlskirche. Und sie sagt, die ging bloß rein, um ein Teil, irgendein Stück zu hören. Sie musste nicht das ganze Konzert dabei bleiben, aber wenn was Besonderes war, da kam sie überall rein und sie hat in der Musik gelebt. Gleichzeitig war sie aber sehr sportlich. Sie hat Tennis gespielt, sie ist Berg gestiegen. Die fuhren im Sommer sehr oft nach Altaussee. Das war also ihre zweite Heimat, glaube ich. Da kannten sie interessante Leute, die sie jedes Jahr dort getroffen haben und die gingen klettern, die gingen wandern, schwimmen und das war für sie auch eine wunderbare Zeit. Den Übergang zur Fotografie hat sie nicht so sehr erwähnt, aber es war dann so, dass sie so Neuritis im Arm gekriegt hat und mit dem Klavierspielen, das war klar, dass sie das nicht als Beruf ergreifen konnte. Und dann hat sie sich auf die Fotografie gestürzt. Und ich habe eigentlich erst in dieser Ausstellung in Wien, wo die 42 österreichische Fotografinnen ausgestellt wurden, verstanden, dass das insbesondere für jüdische, aber sonst für junge Frauen, die beruflich selbstständig sein wollten, einer der wenigen Öffnungen war, die überhaupt für Frauen offen standen. Denn in den meisten Berufen wurde man als Frau einfach nicht ernst genommen. Und sie fand, dass sie in Wien als sie fertig war mit ihrer Fotoausbildung, auch nie ernst genommen würde, weil sie aus entsprechenden Hause kam, wo man nur zu heiraten hatte und Familie zu gründen und berufstätig zu sein, kam eigentlich in solchen Kreisen nicht in Frage. Deswegen ist sie ins Ausland gegangen und hat gemeint, wenn sie wirklich Fotografin werden will, muss sie woanders hingehen, wo man sie nicht kennt und wo sie sozusagen nur mit dem, was sie kann, anerkannt wird und nicht, weil sie aus diesem und jenem Hause stammt. Und ich glaube, das war für sie auch eine sehr interessante Zeit. Aber ja, dass sie 36 nach England ging, da hatte sie sofort eine Ausstellung, glaube ich. Die Österreicher haben sie sehr unterstützt. Ich weiß nicht, in was für ein Kulturinstitut das war. Der Herr Mickel hat gesagt, das war damals nicht das österreichische Kulturinstitut, das war irgendwas anderes, Vergleichbares. Und sie hatte gleich Erfolg und dann hatte sie auf ihrer Visitenkarte stehen, Children a Speciality, und sie hat viele Kinderbilder gemacht und die habe ich zuerst, die frühen habe ich jetzt zuerst gesehen in diesen Bildern aus den 30er Jahren, die hier jetzt eingespeichert sind, dass sie offenbar mehrere Auftragsfotografien von Kindern gemacht hat, schon damals. Und dann ging sie zurück, ihr Vater war sehr krank, dann ging sie immer wieder nach Österreich zurück. Sie liebte ihr Vater über alles. Also die Geschichte, die erzählt wird, ob sie echt ist oder nicht, das wissen wir nicht. Aber die Geschichte war, da war Tom Hopkinson noch nicht Editor of Picture Post. Der hatte ein bisschen niedrigere Stellung bei einer anderen Zeitschrift und sie wollte ihre Bilder platzieren und sie ging zu ihm wahrscheinlich mit so einem Musterbuch mit verschiedenen Bildern und hat sie ihm vorgelegt und die Geschichte heißt, dass er sofort gemeint hat, als er sie das erste Mal sah, das ist die Frau, die ich heiraten möchte. Dazu muss man sagen, er war schon verheiratet zu diesem Zeitpunkt und noch nicht geschieden. Aber er hat sich in Mami verguckt. Und da hat sie angefangen, auch für ihn zu arbeiten. Kurz darauf ist er dann zur Picture Post gegangen. Und sie hat über 60 Reportagen, glaube ich, in den ungefähr 12 Jahren ab Ende 30 bis 1950, wo mein Vater dann weggegangen ist von Picture Post. Da hat sie da auch aufgehört. Das letzte war, glaube ich, diese schöne Geschichte von Menuhin in Urlaub da in Österreich. Und dieses Kindertransport-Geschichte, die allererste davon, hat sie gesprochen, aber so richtig wahrgenommen habe ich das alles erst sehr viel später, was sie damals gemacht hat, als wir anfingen, uns zu überlegen, was wir jetzt mit ihren Bildern machen.
Well, when she was taken on at Picture Post, she really hadn't done very much photojournalism at all. She had a little portfolio separate to the, as it were, to the main portfolio, which was like a kind of introduction book. And she had street pictures from Vienna in that one as well. And I remember in particular, she had a fascination that was to last all her life with tramps, people who live on the streets. And she had a number of photographs of old men who lived on park benches, and she documented that. And she would show pictures of them never begging, always quite dignified, and often doing things that might be considered uncharacteristic of a tramp, such as staring into bookshop windows or looking into galleries. And of course then having to sleep rough, and still in the days where they kept their possessions tied up in their food in a handkerchief and their possessions also tied up in a piece of cloth. I mean, very much of its time. She came to England, and the custom was, I think fairly unthinkingly, that women would do the soft stories. Therefore, the women photographers and there were some at Picture Post, would be sent out to photograph school children and nuns often. Mummy was very good at photographing children, in fact, well before she had her own. And she would manage to establish a rapport, and she would manage to get quite natural pictures of children. And she would do pictures of a nursery school, and she particularly liked things that were also progressive. And there was an open-air nursery school in Chelsea, where she and Tom were living, that was founded really on sort of Rudolf Steiner principles. And the children were outdoors for most of the day. And they started before they were 2. And they were learning from very early on with sand and water and all the different kinds of play that you had. But being kept outside and encouraged to climb trees and frames and all the rest of it. And she would take these pictures very much as she was supposed to do. But I think she was also very often looking for an artistic dimension. So she then did a story about parents and children, but it would be actors, dynasty of actors like the Redgrave family in England. And she was photographed 3 generations of the Redgraves or the Oliviers and so on. And she was very at home, I think, in the theatre, whether it was opera or it was drama that she was documenting. But she never took formally staged productions, really. And she would use her family. She did a series on people who lived on boats, barges on the Thames, not far from the house in Chelsea, but downriver where the area was much poorer towards World's End. And there was still a working class community. They worked the barges, and they came really from quite a poor background, all of them. And they lived quite primitively because there was no electricity or running water there on the barges. And my uncle, my father's brother, Stefan, was a vicar, a priest in the Church of England, and he worked with that community and he integrated into it and also lived on a barge there for some time. So Mummy had access to meeting all the families there and got very natural pictures again of the children. And it's again often a story of grace under pressure, which is Hemingway's famous description of courage. He was talking about men of war, but really it's the women that very often had the tough lives. And the women are built very strongly often, but the little girls are also helping them from the very beginning, mooring and unmooring with these huge ropes, with the barges carrying all the water on and off from the land and so on. And it really gives a picture of a way of life that had been carrying on for centuries, but was very soon to end.
Ja, also diese amerikanische Freundin, die ja sehr betucht war an Fotografie interessiert, war auch sehr lieb zu uns und hat sich auch sehr um Mami gekümmert in den Jahren, wo es ihr ziemlich schlecht ging finanziell, und fand die Idee sehr gut, dass sie eine Österreich-Ausstellung macht. Und sie hatte auch eine ganze Menge Fotos von früher, aber um Österreich darzustellen, hatte sie große Lücken, die sie ausfüllen wollte. Und dann haben wir diesen Sommer, 57 glaube ich, in Österreich verbracht. Und Amanda und ich waren eine Zeit lang in so einer Pension am Wolfgangsee und im Hotel arbeitete das Zimmermädchen meiner Großmutter, die Anna, und sie hat in ihrer Freizeit sich um uns gekümmert. Am Sonstigen waren wir so ein bisschen auf uns gestellt, aber auf der anderen Seeseite wohnte eine Freundin meiner Mutter, die Schriftstellerin Hilde Spiel, und die hatten ein herrliches Haus am Wasser und die Kinder waren so ungefähr in meinem Alter und da sind wir gelegentlich halt mit dem Boot rüber gefahren und haben Tischtennis da gespielt mit denen. Und dann sind wir wieder mitgefahren und waren, weil diese Freundin Carol sich sehr für Musik und für Oper interessierte. Sie hatte uns auch sehr großzügigerweise eingeladen zum Salzburger Festspielen. Ich habe, glaube ich, vorhin gesagt, das ist das einzige Mal, wo ich in meinem Leben in den Salzburger Festspielen war. Da haben wir Così fan tutte in Innenhof der Residenz gesehen. Das war für mich das erste Opernbesuch und unvergesslich. Und dann waren wir mit ihr in Wien und da waren wir in Fidelio und hinterher bei Sacher zum Essen eingeladen. Und das war natürlich als 15-Jähriger was ja undenkbar, das Ganze. Und sowas von nobel, da war ich schon ein bisschen nervös und ich hatte so ein langes Kleid an, auch ungewohnt, und mir rutschte dauernd die Serviette runter. Und dann kam immer ein Diener in Livree mit einem Silberteller mit einer neuen Serviette. Das hat einen bleibenden Eindruck hinterlassen. Leider ist Carol dann sehr krank geworden. Das hat sich für sie nicht verwirklicht, was sie sich unter Fotografielernen vorgestellt hatte. Und in Wien, meine Mutter war beschäftigt mit Fotografien und ich als 15-Jährige habe versucht, mich ein bisschen um Carol zu kümmern und habe sie dann auch, sie hat dann abgebrochen, habe sie zum Flughafen begleitet. Und sie hat, als sie wieder zu Hause war, mir einen Scheck für $1.000 geschickt mit vielen Dank und dass ich mal Amerika besuchen konnte. Und da habe ich mal später, als ich in Cambridge war, also einen ganzen Sommer lang, 99 Days und $99, eine Rundreise durch die USA gemacht. Aber sie hatte das alles finanziert und meine Mutter hat das dann zu Ende gemacht, diese Serie, die war auch im Burgenland, glaube ich, damals. Und sie Kärnten und die Lücken, die sie hatte, hat sie in diesem Sommer dann abgedeckt und dann fand diese Ausstellung. Einfache Bevölkerung sehr interessiert, insbesondere auf dem Lande. Und wenn zum Beispiel, wenn man irgendwo auf so eine kleine Schotterstraße fuhr und dann war irgendein Gatter und irgendein Kind hat Gatter aufgemacht, dass man durchfahren konnte und da ist sie stehen geblieben und hat gleich das Kind und die Bauern beim Heu machen oder was auch immer, die Bauern in ihr, also das ist auch das Thema Altbach, aber sie hat ganz gerne einfach irgendwo, wo sie was gesehen hat, ist sie stehen geblieben. Ich hatte nicht das Gefühl, dass man lange warten musste oder so auf sie, sondern sie hat was gesehen und das hat sie gleich in ihren Leica festgehalten. Und wenn das Licht nicht richtig war, musste man vielleicht noch ein bisschen warten, aber sie wusste, was sie wollte. Also, und gelegentlich war sie dann ganz frustriert, weil sie nicht stehen bleiben konnte, wo sie, ich weiß noch, wir sind mal nach Linz gefahren und da kamen lauter Radler in so einem Gegenlicht, da war ein Sturm und irrsinnige Wolken und sie sagt, also das ist ja wohl verflixt, dass ich hier nicht stehen bleiben kann und das fotografieren. Also das müsste doch drin sein. Sie war richtig wütend, dass das einfach verkehrstechnisch nicht möglich war. Sie hat was gesehen und dann wollte sie das gleich festhalten. Aber sie hatte so diesen künstlerischen Blick und für sie war auch Licht, Wetter, Atmosphäre sehr, sehr wichtig. Und du kennst das Bild von Salzburg, so im Nebel. Das war ein sehr populäres Bild und wir hatten einen netten Zahnarzt in London und sie meinte immer, wir sollten Goldplomben kriegen, was natürlich unbezahlbar war. Aber der Zahnarzt, der fand dieses Bild von Salzburg so schön und er hat gesagt, gut, dann machen Sie mir eine schöne Vergrößerung von Salzburg für mein Wartezimmer und die Kinder kriegen ihre Goldplomben. Aufgeteilt in dem Sinne, wenn sie einen Termin mit einem Künstler hatte oder so, dann wurden die Termine natürlich eingehalten. Aber am Sonstigen fotografierte sie, was ihr gerade so über den Weg kam. Und wenn wir gemotzt hatten oder das Wetter sehr schön war, dann hat sie gesagt, okay, jetzt gehen wir ein paar Stunden schwimmen. Und vielleicht während wir geschwommen sind, hat sie wieder was anderes Interessantes entdeckt, was sie dann in der Zeit noch fotografiert hat. Ich kann nicht sagen, das wurde irgendwo aufgeteilt zeitlich, sondern das eine floss ins andere über und außer eben, sie hatte feste Termine, also die Reportagen, die sie über einzelne Bildhauer, Musiker und so weiter gemacht hat. Das hat Amanda als Kleinkind sehr geärgert, dass sie da mitgeschleift wurde zu diesen Terminen. Das fand sie nicht witzig. Aber das passierte bei mir nicht, weil ich älter war und wenn sie vielleicht unterwegs war, war ich vielleicht bei einer Freundin nebenan oder ich kann mich nicht erinnern, sozusagen umgeschleift worden zu sein.
Well, by the 1960s, Mummy was already saying that she hadn't given up on photography, but photography had given up on her. I think she became tired. I think, you know, as we get older, change is hard and harder. And she had been through the heyday of photography in a way. You know, she had had 20, 25 really good years where she had moved and been very flexible in moving from portraiture and work, particularly with musicians and theatre and artists, and she moved in that fantastic milieu that there was in Vienna, and a lot of which then came through exile to London. She knew all these artists like Kokoschka really well. I remember visiting his flat a great deal when I was a child. I always thought he was a terribly grumpy old man. And I felt personally betrayed by him because I went to an exhibition opening and he asked me at the end of the exhibition, I was about 6 or 7, I suppose, which painting I liked best. And I said, as any child of that age would, the Tiglon, the half lion, half tiger picture of this beast. And he said, oh, you can have it when you go home. And then he didn't give it to me when I went home. And now it's hanging in the Belvedere in Vienna, and it should be in my living room. So I thought he was, you know, a charlatan. But Mummy was quite brave. She took a classic portrait of him with his umbrella going down the street in Salzburg, where, you know, he started the art school here, and he wanted it as postcard. So she made a run of postcards for him and delivered them. And he wrote back to her and said, oh, well, it's all very well. These are lovely postcards, lovely pictures. But I wanted them, I can't remember which way it was. I wanted them matte and you've done them gloss, or I wanted them gloss and you've done them matte. And they had a correspondence and she stuck up for herself and she wrote back and sent him the original order form where he'd ordered what she'd done. And he said, no, well, then I've changed my mind. You have to change the pictures. And she said, of course, I can reprint them the other way, but then you have to pay me. And he said, no, I'm only paying for the ones I want to keep. So then, you know, that was the kind of man he was. And she hated all that kind of negotiation. She said, I can't be a businesswoman and a photographer. She already found that. And that was from early on doing the artist portraits. Then came, as it were, the heavenly years. Not politically, but in terms of interesting work where she had to become a photojournalist and invent her own stories, which she did, and she managed to invent enough that kept bringing her back to her roots in Austria, which she never really pulled up. And she photographed many stories for Picture Post, both from here, the Spring Festival ones and the Opera House ones and so on, right through to all the ones she did in Britain for Picture Post too. And then she came out of that, and it was the new era really of the weekly photo magazines, starting with the Sunday Times and Harold Evans and so on. And she then changed again. She worked more in color. She started with the picture magazines, but really coming into the 60s, there was a whole new generation, the new British photography boys, you know, around David Bailey and the war photographers and so on. And she really had nothing to do with that generation. And she carried on with the glossy magazines like Tatler and Queen. And then there was a raft that came and went like Holiday and Nova. And she did travel photography, which again wasn't completely her thing. She was never a tourist. She was always interested in exploring new places and new cultures. But just selling holidays, it was a struggle. And the business side became more and more of a struggle as it became more commercial, getting paid the right amount, having to do more private work. Again, it was gender related. If she had been a man, maybe she would have done more corporate work, and maybe that would have been even more boring. As she was a woman, she got the soft options. She photographed rich people's children, their rites of passage, their weddings, their funerals, their children's christenings and baptisms. But it wasn't really where her heart was, though she did quite a lot for friends. And I think she decided then, as she was approaching the age of 60, she'd had enough. She was going to leave London and she was going to go back to Austria and retire there, really, and sell her cameras. But she couldn't quite bring herself to get rid of all the photographs. And we'd kept this house in Hampstead where she moved when I was 7 or 8 after the divorce with my father. And there was a whole darkroom there, obviously full of chests of her photographs. And when she retired to Salzburg, she got it down to one enormous great sea chest full of her photographs. And she offered me, at the age of 18 at university, did I want this nice 5-bedroom house in the heart of Hampstead, in the middle of Hampstead Heath, which is like the sort of cultural quarter of London. And I said, no, what would I want with a place like that? I was going off to hitchhike barefoot around Latin America, which I did, and I wasn't the least bit interested in a large house in the center of Hampstead. How stupid was that? So she moved to a little village outside Salzburg. I think she did not feel comfortable going back to Vienna. I think in one sense she had decided that Hitler was right after the war when she went back in 47 or 8. I think she was really shocked. Hitler had said that everything was being run by the Jews. They'd taken over. And I think she was horrified that she found that everyone, from all the people she'd known at the opera house and the theatre, to a local bank manager, the corner shop, everyone was gone. And all of a sudden, the other people she'd known, thinking herself so assimilated, who were not Jewish, of course had never been Nazis. And I think in a way that was even harder, because to go back and find that your group, as it were, your family group or your racial group has been annihilated is one thing, but to go back and find that all the annihilators were in denial about the fact was also extremely hard. And she decided she couldn't go back to Vienna. And she came back to Salzburg, which was the home of music for her, where she'd done some of her favorite stories, and she found a little place she could rent in a village, which is now on the outskirts of Salzburg, was in the countryside, Selheim. And she had this big chest of her photographs there. And then, unfortunately, in a very short space of time, when I was just in my early 20s, she fell ill with a brain tumor. And she had some really fairly horrible operations here in Salzburg that removed probably too much of her brain, not necessarily much, but it meant she lost really her memory. And I brought her back to live with us in England. I was living in Warwickshire, a rural town called Royal Leamington Spa. She lived next door in a little flat with someone looking after her. But we had a baby alarm from her room into ours, so we always could hear her at night. After brain surgery, it's common to have epilepsy. And she would come to our house every day, and she spent weekends with us when our housekeeper was away, went on holiday together, came back to Salzburg. Her old housekeeper from Salzburg came to Leamington, and she was very much a part of the family for all her last years of life, 7 or 8 years still. And the sea chest of photographs, again, it was slimmed down, but in the end, I brought back 40 boxes of photographs of my mother's, and through the 5 different house moves I made since then, the 40 boxes of photographs came with us everywhere. I tried for a period of 20 years to get anyone interested in Britain in the photographs. Nobody was remotely interested. The name of all those sorts of photojournalists had gone with the wind. They really were not well known. And even her own peers like Wolf Suschitsky and his sister Edith Tudor Hart, who again anglicized her name, took her husband's name, are much better known now than they were in those years in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Really unknown. It took till this century for there to be an interest. So the boxes stayed in my basement or in my garage or wherever it was. Paid years of storage to keep them in ABC stores in London when I moved back to London, when my marriage broke up. But the photographs always came with me. And my mother died in Leamington Spa with me. I spent the last week of her life with her there, and she died in my arms very peacefully in the end, and is buried there. And I had a close friend who was a nurse who used to come and help and visit a great deal, and she is the sort of guardian of the grave, which is still there, and on it is Goethe's Wanderers Nachtlied, and then also a quotation from St. John's Gospel about going to the place where there's no more crying, tears or anguish. And I do feel she is at rest there. And it was her photographs I wanted to animate, and it was purely by chance. I tried, as well as with all the British institutions, and I had no better luck than Helmut and Alison Gernsheim when they tried to donate their fabulous collection of European photography, even to the National Museum of Photography, Film and Television. Nobody wanted a big archive like that, much better organized than my 40 boxes, and they all went to the United States. So I tried much more small scale, and I started sending images on a CD-ROM to the Austrian Institute again, which is now called the Austrian Cultural Forum. And the third director I tried, a man called Peter Mikl, suddenly saw the photographs and said, but I want an exhibition of that. And I curated a very small exhibition to go there with samples of her work through the different periods of her life, but just the black and white work up until really the mid-60s. And that then sort of took on a life of its own. And the Austrian Cultural Forum decided to tour it. It went to Prague, where Mummy's family also had been living. It went to Berlin as well. And then out of that, of course, one Kurt Kaindl and his wife Brigitte Kaindl saw the exhibition, I think initially in London, then came and saw it in various incarnations in different places and took over.
Also das war Anfang 51, da sind wir nach Altbach in Tirol für 3 Monate gefahren. Meine Mutter war in Scheidung und wollte weg von allem. Und Altbach war damals am Ende der Welt. Also da gab es anscheinend einmal am Tag einen Bus und der Bus fuhr immer weg, bevor der Zug ankam. Und als sie dann den Bahnwärter gefragt hat, wieso immer der Bus wegfährt, bevor der Zug ankommt, dann sagte er, aber im Nachbardorf haben sie gar keinen Bus. Also das war also sehr modern und sehr luxuriös, dass es überhaupt einen Bus gab. Da war er ganz erbost bei dieser Frage. Aber es war wirklich absolut primitivst Österreich, wunderschön, alte Holzhäuser. Was mich schockiert hat als Kleinkind, war, dass die kleinen Zicken, die Mini-Ziegen, furchtbar gejammert haben. Die wurden eingeschlossen und dann geschlachtet. Und ich habe mich danach geweigert, monatelang Fleisch zu essen. Das war so ein Schockerlebnis für mich. Aber das war absolut dörflich, das Ganze, und eine sehr geschlossene Gemeinschaft. Und diese skurrilen Sachen wie eben die Faschingsverkleidung vom Lehrer und Bürgermeister und so das Dorfleben. Sie hat auch Bilder gemacht, diese Streuselmacherin. Ich weiß nicht, ob du die Bilder kennst. Da ist Amanda als Kleinkind mit drauf. Das war eine Frau, die für Hochzeiten und besonderen Anlässen so mit ganz kleinen Perlen, wunderschöne Gebinde mit Blumen und Knoten und so gemacht hat. Und jeder hat es auf seinem Corsage getragen. Und das war sie hauptberuflich. Sie hat also immerzu diese wunderschönen Gebinde gemacht. Und wenn es im Dorf eine Hochzeit gab, das hat sie auch fotografiert, dann wurden die ganzen Möbel und die Geschenke, die Braut und Bräutigam erhalten haben, auf große Schlitten drauf montiert, auch Riesenschränke und enorme Möbelstücke und wurden durchs Dorf getragen, dass jeder sehen konnte, was hier für eine tolle Ausstattung diese Familie bekommen hat. Und alle begleiteten die bis zur Haustür und konnten sehen, ja, das ist noch im alten Stil, so gehört sich das.
All right, well, surprise, I came to start writing on photography, and it was only really when I wrote my first biography, which was of the high Victorian British photographer Julia Margaret Cameron, that I realized, of course, what I'd done in a very elementary way was to combine father and mother, not to be too Freudian about it all. My father was the writer, my mother was the photographer, and they ended up writing a biography of a photographer. And out of that book then came all kinds of requests to other books on photography. And I did one with the Getty Foundation that was published in Germany by Koenemann in a German edition, and then also in Britain. That was the history of photojournalism. And I was doing the 20th century part of the history, and it went more or less by decades. And the librarian at the Getty Foundation pulled a whole lot of pictures from the 1930s. And I said, well, we have to have some about the Kindertransport. I saw some pictures of that. And I started pulling the ones from these piles. The way he did it was just to bring piles and piles of photographs and strew them all over the desk. And I started pulling the ones that caught me, the ones I really wanted to include. And one of the first ones I saw was this extraordinarily striking young girl with a very, very long plaits and this very marked eyebrows, very sharp face, looking in focus. And I just found her irresistible. And I think it's a common response to that picture because it was one that was blown up more than human size outside the exhibition in Prague of Mummy's work. It's just a formidable photograph, really. And I looked at her and I felt engaged with her. And Leo, the librarian, asked me, do you know who took that photograph? And it was one of those moments where you engage mouth before you engage brain. And without thinking about it, I said, yes, Mummy did. And I had no idea she'd ever photographed the Kindertransport. And I asked Nicolette, and she said, no, she had no idea either. Mummy never talked about the war with us. My father did, but not Mummy. And it was quite shocking to see she had this whole body of work that I didn't know about. And it showed the first day of life in Britain of these poor young arrivals who didn't even have a name, were reduced to a number. And they each had a label on them with a number on it. And the reason why they did not have their names with them was that it could be dangerous for their families back at home. And they came from Prague or Vienna, wherever it was, on the trains to England, very much facilitated by a British MP who set up the whole system that was going, Nicholas Lytton. And they arrived on the boat at Dovercourt in Kent. And the poor the poor children, they had no family, were taken to a holiday camp, pretty gruesome, pretty cold, with a big canteen, and they were looked after there, and then dispersed to families that would foster or adopt them. But it was quite a horrific beginning. And again, it was Mummy's technique to find the dignity and the individuality of the person, very much present in that photograph, but also find moments of amusement. And there are pictures where their children are being summoned to their meal, with the boys kind of jostling each other to ring this enormous bell. They obviously wanted to take turns in calling everybody to lunch. or using their bunks as a kind of climbing frame and all climbing up and playing. Because children, it doesn't matter how desperate their situation. You look at any photographs of a refugee camp now, they always play wherever they are. However cold or dirty or hungry, they still really play until they've reached the very last stages of life. And these kids were going to go on living and become part of a European life here. So in a way, they're very positive pictures, but it's also where these children have come from that they bring with them. They're very moving pictures too. Well, this is a photograph that Mummy took with Inge Murat at the Salzburg Festspiele in the summer of 1951. And she is again telling the story behind the story. She's not showing us the production of the Zauberflöte, the magic flute, but the cleaning women preparing for the evening's production by sweeping and polishing the stage, which was from a former riding school, where the horses were brought out to show their dressage for the Archbishop's Palace. And what's amusing, of course, it's an eye for humor, which is something she very much shared with Inge Murat. I remember them always as laughing together. And Inge Murat was my very unlikely godmother. As a great friend of my mother's, she became my godmother, and her husband, Lionel Birch, who was a journalist working for my father, was my godfather. Absolutely lousy godparents, but a part of our extended family. So she and Mummy would collaborate, and they had a similar eye when they worked in Austria together. And I don't know always exactly whose finger pressed the button on the camera. And it shows the cleaners, as it were, in the background. In the foreground, there seems to be a person sitting rather wearily, leaning forwards. And at first you think that's going to be a cleaner, but then you realize, in fact, it's a big stone sculpture that belongs to the stage. And what's nice is that one of the cleaners have treated him exactly like they treat themselves, and taken one of their cloths they're polishing with and flung it over his shoulder. So he looks as though he's been cleaning as well, and he's just sitting and taking a rest.
Ich glaube, was sowohl Amanda als auch ich sehr bereuen, ist, dass wir damals nicht die richtigen Fragen gestellt haben. Es gibt ganz große Lücken in dem, was wir über Mami wissen. Und warum wir das damals nicht gefragt haben, weiß ich nicht. Wahrscheinlich interessiert man sich in jungen Jahren gar nicht so sehr für Familiengeschichte. Und bis man es hätte wirklich wissen wollen, war sie dann krank und dann ging nichts mehr. Und das habe ich von anderen Leuten auch gehört, dass solche Situationen entstehen. Wir können es uns jetzt nicht mehr erklären, warum